Well, good afternoon. I'm Chris Temple, editor and publisher of the National Investor, and I'm pinch hitting for a buddy of mine today to tell you about Bactech Environmental. Bactech is a company I've known about for over 10 years. I recommended it in my newsletter about 4.5 years ago now. And it's a company really that hits a lot of different high points and checks a lot of boxes as we're getting into a point in time where a lot of social trends, economic trends, societal needs, everything are kind of coalescing and all hitting the same thing. So I'm going to give you the high points of that, try and keep it to about 15 minutes or so, and then I'll be happy to answer some questions for you as best as I can. So first, of course, the obligatory slides that securities regulators want. We even have an extra one today for yours truly. When Ross and Noble asked if I could pinch hit for him, the CEO, because his son is getting married in Mexico this weekend, so that's where he is. I said, all right, well, let's see, as long as you don't think the lawyers will have a stroke, then that's fine. So I want to stress, and we can send you all this presentation afterward, of course, that the National Investor does cover Bactech. It was recommended to my subscribers. Subsequent to that, I also get paid by them as a consultant on media and things, and I am a shareholder. It's one of my personal largest positions, in fact, because I love the story. And so what is the story? You know, for a lot of years, and I love to use this analogy, you had very bad practices in the forestry industry. And that was especially true in Canada, somewhat in the western U.S., where loggers in the early days would go in and simply raise land. They clear cut huge parcels of land in the mountains out in the west and so forth. And of course that caused silt runoff, it killed fish populations, it affected the ecosystem and the whole deal. And they did that because they were able to get away with it. It was the cheapest, the easiest thing to do. And it wasn't until some years later when society generally figured out that this is a bad practice that this industry was required, in many areas at least, to do more selective logging. What do we have today? We have a mining industry, which, if you've ever heard of the EPA years ago setting up their Superfund slush fund of money to clean up projects, you've had a lot of situations in the western U.S., you've had them in Canada, you've had them the world over, where mining has been done. A lot of bad stuff was left behind, toxic tailings, the mine waste itself, everything. And it was not a good situation. And so we're at a point now where even though the technology that Bactech has had for years has been around, and the mining industry just basically gave it the cold shoulder. They didn't have to do this. Well, now, because of increased environmental concerns everywhere, the mining industry is having to reckon with this. And what's more, in Bactech's case particularly, its regimen to be able to take arsenopyrite specifically and other types of very difficult ores, sometimes difficult waste material as well, to take that, render the arsenic inert, and recover gold, copper, and other metals from it, and do it very economically, as I'll show you in a minute. It's something whose time really has come. Now, what do we have today? We've heard all about this commodity super cycle. And yes, it's too slow right now, but as the years go by, there's going to be a lot of new mining come online. It's not happening fast enough for what the needs are, especially for electric vehicles, but it's going to come. One of the ways, though, in which there's going to be less resistance to increasing the supply of metals is with a company like Bactech that can go into areas where you've got difficult ores. There's all kinds of different chemical compositions that make it environmentally hazardous, make the metals hard to recover, and they can recover this stuff, clean up the environment at the same time, and make some money along the way. So you've heard recently that in Canada, they just had a multi-year measure in the national budget. I think it's a total of $4 billion actually for different battery metals projects, helping that industry out. Here in the U.S., President Biden recently invoked the Defense Production Act, focusing on things like rare earths especially, because as I'm sure you've all known and heard, including at this conference, we remain hugely and disproportionately dependent on countries like Russia and China and others for the great majority of all of our needs. You'll hear Mark Chalmers tonight at 5 o'clock talk about that in the context of uranium, of course, where Russia is concerned. So the issues, again, growing demand for resources. We don't have nearly enough to go around. All of the projections that have been made for example, in this country, we're going to have half of the new auto production by 2030 be electric vehicles. That's a fantasy. General Motors and Ford and Toyota and even Tesla do not have magical extrusion machines that just magically spit out electric vehicles. You need 3 times the copper in the typical vehicle that runs on a battery than you do in a vehicle that uses the traditional internal combustion engine, etc. We don't have nearly enough. And again, processes and companies like Bactech, which can go where other companies didn't want to go, and learn how to take what used to be thrown away, what used to be too difficult, and make money on it. That's going to be in demand because at the same time that they're doing some, quote, green mining, they are able to help meet some of the shortfall in metals that we're going to have. The second thing I want to really stress, because one of the reasons I love Bactech is that I love Ecuador even more. It's a company I've visited many times. I was there ahead of all of my colleagues who long since said, well, Ecuador is no good. Look at what happened back in 2007 and 2008. People have not come to the realization yet, for the most part, that it is one of the most exciting emerging jurisdictions in the world for the mining industry. Just this morning, with a pre-feasibility study released on the Cascabel project in the northern part of the country, one of the biggest copper gold discoveries in the world in the last 10 or 12 years. The government is not perfect, then again, neither is this. We've had several instances in the recent past where projects in the U.S. have been slowed down or stopped. It's happened in Alaska, it's happened in Minnesota, it's happened in Arizona. But that doesn't mean that it's no good to look at projects in Nevada, or look at projects in Idaho, or look at other ones in Arizona or Alaska that didn't have quite the hurdles environmentally and others to jump through. So Ecuador is a great place, and more so because in that country a huge industry is for artisanal miners. You know, it's long since been done away with in the U.S. what happened a century or so ago, where families and individuals would go out to the western U.S., stake some ground, maybe get it patented, okay? And for a couple or 3 generations, they and their descendants after them would make a living off this land. That's been pretty much done away with in the U.S. except for a tiny handful of cases. In Ecuador, this is still a major part of many local economies. And what had happened along the way in recent years is that when these artisanal miners in Ecuador had difficult ore which had a high arsenopyrite component to it and made it difficult, they had one place pretty much that they were able to sell these things, this material to, and that was China. And until the recent past, China was paying, give or take, 50 cents on the dollar for the value of this material, and these artisanal miners in Ecuador would export it to these Chinese interests and get paid 50 cents more or less on a dollar, which now has been reduced because China itself has put a new import tax on such material of 13%, so knock 13% off the previous 50. Now when you take a look, and I urge you to do so at Bactech's website, bactechgreen.com is what that is, and this presentation also, as I said a minute ago, is available if you like. Just make sure I have your contact information. It will be sent to you. Excuse me. But in the recent past, they put out a bankable feasibility study on the first process plant they intend to build in the Ponce Enriquez area of Ecuador as soon as they get the project financing, which is in the works. They're finishing up their own financing right now that will augment that. And in under 2 years, they can pay back the roughly $17 million of debt that they're going to take on because according to the feasibility study, their profit will be almost $11 million a year, and that is at $1,600 gold and $18 an ounce silver. Out of that profit, they have a pool that they pay into 15% of those pre-tax profits to the locals, who, if all goes well, according to this plan, will get 3 or 4 times more in bonuses each year. than they get in salary. So the local economy, I can tell you, is very thrilled with the prospect of this project coming on. Furthermore, the artisanal miners that they buy the concentrate from will be back to getting 65 to 70% of the gross value of the material that they send to Bactech and their plant. So they'll basically be doubling what the Chinese want to pay them right now. So everybody wins in this, and furthermore, when you consider any government, whether it's Ecuador or whoever, is always under pressure by the quote left to make sure that they clean up the environment. The fact that you have an opportunity, a company like this, to make some money, to do some good for the local economy, to pay people more in that part of the world than they've ever dreamed of getting in any other jobs that they've had, and do a major environmental remediation project at the same time. That's all pretty good stuff. Now, just real quick, I want to explain the process. Most ores that you have trouble with are sulfides of some kind. There's arsenic in them. There's very methodical, very deep processes you have to go through. Those of you who have followed the mining industry in the state of Nevada especially know that Nevada Gold Mines today, of course, which is the conglomeration of Newmont and Barrick when they joined forces in Nevada a while ago, they have had to come up with special roasters, as they call them, to cook away these kind of sulfides as part of the refining process down there. In Bactech's case, they use bacteria. And as you'll see on Bactech's website, their motto is, "Our bugs eat rocks." And so the way Ross likes to explain it, it's real easy to remember this. If you're looking at a brick wall where you've got bricks laid in there and you've got the mortar in between, that mortar, think of that as the sulfides, as the arsenic that is prevalent in great many different kinds of ores the world over. This bacteria eats through that. Importantly, it renders the arsenic harmless. The arsenic, by the time the bacteria is done with it, is benign. It's not a negative for the environment. It can be discarded in a landfill if people wanted to do that. And at the same time, having gotten rid of that, now you got just the bricks, or in other words, the metal that is left that can now be marketed. So it's a really, really neat process. It does away with all of these problems that still exist in the mining industry today. There's our bugs eat rocks. So you've got a commercially proven process, and again, this has been around for years. What has changed as Bactech has refined the process, they've done their lab work, I'm going to talk about a couple key people at the end, etc. It's not so much that the process has gotten that much better, it's that there's now a lot more compelling reasons for the industry to use this stuff, and there's a lot more compelling reasons why policymakers and regulators are going to start requiring this use ever more. So right now, if you see, as you see on the left commercial, the first plant that is planned in the Ponce Enriquez area of Ecuador will liberate primarily gold, I think a little bit of silver in there as well. In the recent past, the company has announced initiatives where they're going to do more homework on other areas, other types of metals. Canada, of course, is a huge mining jurisdiction. The Sudbury Basin alone in Ontario, where you've had huge mines in the past, and others now in construction and which are being repurposed, so to speak, have had huge resources of nickel, copper, etc. And there's a lot of this kind of stuff up there too. And again, to date, the reclamation processes governments have required, let alone the economic disincentives to do this, have stood in the way of using these kinds of processes to clean up the environment, go look at some of these ores that were discarded in the past, etc., and figure out a way to do this, quote, green mining. Now the time is here for that. Rare earths you see on the right here. You know, one of the things that is unfortunate right now, at least where U.S. policy is concerned, and I alluded to this a minute ago, is that it's not being taken seriously enough yet that we needed to get serious yesterday about where all of our copper and nickel and cobalt and platinum group metals and uranium and all these other needs going to be met within our own four walls. It can be done, but there's been a lot of roadblocks to that. But one of the things besides the uranium thing that you'll hear about at 5 o'clock, one of the things that is going to help to knock down some of these roadblocks procedurally, regulator-wise, and as far as policy is concerned, are rare earths. And Bactech, when you look at their website, just announced that they're starting to do some pretty deep dives into how they can use the same process in stuff even that's been thrown away in the past in different parts of the country and in different parts really of North America and the whole Western Hemisphere. How can they now liberate rare earth elements? Because I don't know, for those of you that may or may not know this, the term rare earth element is somewhat of a misnomer because all these different substances are actually very plentiful in nature. The trick is to liberate them properly and then put them into usable forms that are used in batteries and technology and aerospace, in guidance systems and all this different kind of thing. And so this could be another really revolutionary way in which we can go back to some old stuff that's been thrown away and be able to use it. The Bio Leaching Facility, I kind of covered a lot of it already. And again, we'll send you these slides later on, but the Tengel project and Ponce Enriquez, go to their website, the February 8th news release. It'll just blow your mind, the economics behind this thing. For a company with a little over $20 million market cap, to be able to net half of that annually with this initial plant is going to be rather remarkable if all goes well. And again, I mentioned why Ecuador. It's an up-and-coming jurisdiction. They have had phenomenal support throughout the country. The previous government, the present government under President Guillermo Lasso, who's been in office about a year now, it's a no-brainer, folks, that you can help communities, raise wages, raise living standards. With that money, provide a lot of other improvements in life for some of these people, make money for the shareholders, and make the politicians that enabled this cleanup of the environment look pretty darn good in the process. That's something, I don't care whether they're left, right, up, down, center, everybody wants the voters to think they're wonderful and they're heroes. And if you can check these ESG boxes as you engage in mining and in reclamation, that's all the better. Again, it's $1,600 gold. The EBITDA per year with a 58% internal rate of return would be just under $11 million. Today, gold is between $1,900 and $2,000. So you can look at the numbers. And again, for a company with a $21 or $22 million market cap right now, it's pretty darn compelling. So they're permitting. They've got some of the initial permits already to build a plant. They should have, hopefully, everything else they need in fairly short order. They're finishing their own financing right now and looking for the project financing, which will be in a form of debt for the balance of it. And I know that the company is talking to a few different parties on that. Nothing, however, has been announced yet. But if all goes well, then by the third quarter of this year, they'll start construction. And somewhere in a neighborhood of 12 to 18 months from now, they should be getting the cash flow out of this thing, and then it's off to the races. And what's really exciting to me about this, and again, I recommended this quite a while ago to my readers and bought some good slug of this myself, is that this is something, it's almost like a McDonald's or one of these other things that you can franchise. It's easily done. This is just one little tiny part of the country of Ecuador. You've got multiple places elsewhere in Ecuador, in Peru, also on their website with the recent press releases, you'll see some news about Peru. There's some interest down there now in this process. The U.S., Canada, elsewhere. These plants, the first of which will be constructed hopefully by the time this year is done, they can be replicated everywhere. And the economics, of course, depending on a situation, may change, but they're in a great position down there. There's all kinds of people that want to give them concentrates. They can pick and choose. I talked to Ross about this just last week. They will not buy any concentrates that come in. They will not buy any concentrates that come in that have been touched by either cyanide or mercury. Mercury especially is a bane in Ecuador. There's a lot of bad practices still down there that they've got to wring out, and hopefully this is going to be one of the avenues to help do that. Furthermore, of all that they take in to meet the capacity of this plant ultimately, they won't take anything less than 50 grams per ton of gold content, so make sure that these numbers come out really, really well. I want to skip ahead real fast because I'm running out of time. Again, we'll send you this PowerPoint if you just give me your information at the end. Ross Soar, second from the left on the top, of course, he's the CEO. I want to point out a couple other guys. How many people remember the story of Brix back in the 1990s? Anybody? Couple? Jane Astor, who's one of the directors on their audit committee, he was the first Ontario Securities Commission prosecutor who went after Mr. Felderhoff and the rest in that epic story of Brix back in the 1990s. On the bottom, Bernie Brito on the far right. He's a country manager in Ecuador. He's kind of been their bird dog in the country. He's from Ecuador. He's a great local guy, and he's one of the ones that's been helping them get the customers that they're going to have for this. Last but not least, Dr. Paul Miller, who's from Australia. As Ross likes to say, he's the straw that stirs the drink. This is the guy who comes up with the processes to have incredible recoveries through their bio leaching process and whatnot. He's really been the technical genius behind all this whole thing. So that's about all I'll say as far as my prepared stuff or semi-prepared stuff. Are there any questions? Charles? Well, depending on where the ore comes from, the question is that Bactech would not buy concentrates? Is what you said?
Maybe I misunderstood you. You said they would not buy concentrates.
Okay, let me clear that up. Bactech will get concentrates in some instances, crushed ore in others, depending on the content. But what I'm saying is they will not take anything that has been previously treated with either cyanide or mercury. Yeah. Anything else? Well, thank you much. And again, if you'd like a copy of this presentation, just make sure I have your contact information before we leave.